Hello everyone, very happy to be with you, so to speak, this afternoon for this session on planning the sustainable city. Hello Xavier, I hope you can see us and hear us perfectly well. It will be simpler with my two guests here because they're with me, so I know they're here. My name is Elisabeth Laville, I'm the CEO and founder of 3 decades old almost, and Paris-based think tank and sustainability consultancy Utopies. Very happy to be with you today since those issues on cities and local economies are so important for us at Utopies. Just as an introduction, I wanted to share with you there's one guy that I love very much. I had the pleasure to meet several times. His name is Brazilian. Maybe you know him, Xavier. It's Jaime Lerner. Jaime Lerner is the former mayor of Curitiba in Brazil, and he's also the former governor of Paraná State. And he has written a wonderful little book that is called Urban Acupuncture, Urban Acupuncture, in 2003, I think. It's translated in French for our French friends, l'acupuncture urbaine, donc. And in that book, he explains very well that whenever we want to change a very complex system, and obviously cities are complex systems, you cannot act on everything at the same time. And you need to choose to select a few pinpoints where you can press, so to speak, and change the system, just as we do in acupuncture, a few energy pinpoints. And so I suggest that we take this as a mission for our session this afternoon to identify the most relevant pinpoints to change cities and to effect change towards sustainable cities. I must say that we will miss Carlos Moreno in this session because he had a very important and official meeting, unfortunately, at the last minute that he couldn't miss, so we will miss him. But we have maybe more time to exchange with our guests today, and I'm going to introduce them. So on my left is Sébastien Maire, former Chief Resilience Officer of the City of Paris, and now Executive Director of France Ville Durable. He will introduce shortly. Meka Brunel is the CEO of Gecina. And we have decided, oh yes, by the way, I didn't tell you, we had initially 3 sessions. Since Carlos is not with us, we decided we would merge the 2 other sessions in one so as to be together a bit more. And Javier Matilla is the chief architect. He's an architect and an urbanist, associate professor at UPC Barcelona Tech, and chief architect for the city of Barcelona. Thank you for being with us today. From remote. So I will start with a question on, especially maybe for you, Sébastien, to introduce the subject. Since you head France Ville Durable, do you think there is a French approach to sustainable city, to sustainable architecture and maybe to the sustainable city? Is there a French touch or French way to plan the sustainable city?
Firstly, I can mention what France Ville Durable is. It's a non-profit national organization that brings together professional stakeholders from different sides, from different categories. 4 of them, the national government, 4 ministries, agencies in charge of energy, transportation, and so on, building, and so on. Local authorities, municipalities, and soon, I hope, regions and local authorities. Private companies, and that's very important because the transformation that is needed for our territories has to bring together the private and the public sector. And
so companies like Gecina.
Exactly, companies like Gecina. And experts, urban experts, energy experts, architecture experts, and so on. And all these stakeholders try to find together the best practical ways to implement concretely change in the cities. And not only flagship actions, because we know that since 20 years, in main cities and territories, we consider that if you have one ecological school, you communicate a lot about it, but in the same time, you renew or build 5 other schools that are not ecological at all. So the idea is how we bring it to the mainstream of all what's happening on the territory, and that's why we've been working on with our stakeholders. To answer your question, I would say that I don't know if there is a French way of
Or Spanish or European.
I would prefer to say European one, a European one. We worked with students from Sciences Po a month ago to try to identify specificities, French specificities or European specificities regarding, for instance, what we call eco-quartier, eco-neighborhood in English, or
eco-district areas, yes.
Eco-districts. And we compared one operation in France with one in Latin America, one in North America, and one in Asia. And the main specificities were these ones. To sum up, firstly, in Europe, we consider that there is one pilot of the transformation among all the stakeholders, which gets more legitimacy. It's the mayor or the head of the local authority, because the mayor is close to the population. The mayor is close to the businesses, to the private sector. The mayor is maybe the only one able to have these acupuncture points you just mentioned, because he or she knows perfectly the territory. So the mayor is legitimate enough, thank you very much, is legitimate to bring all the stakeholders around the table. And then the transformation, of course, is going to be the job of everyone. But the mayor, and this is not the same, for instance, in the Saxon world, where we consider that sometimes it's mainly the state level and then the private sector. So this is one of the specificities. And I would just mention a second one, democracy. Democracy compared to Chinese, Asian, or a couple of other way of Singapore or other cultures of local management. In Europe, you'll never conduct your city transformation without the inhabitants, or the inhabitants will just tell you, don't do it. And so we have this specificity to build and conduct the transformation with and for the inhabitants, maybe more than other way.
You mean a more participatory approach?
More participatory approach, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Xavier, do you share what Sébastien has just said about maybe what is more a European approach to the sustainable city?
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you first, Elisabeth, for the invitation. And let me apologize because not to be able to stay in person with you today. I would like, but it's not possible. I basically agree. And I would say that European city, and also Barcelona, of course, has been a strong, sustainable urbanistic tradition, I would say. Maybe without knowing, but there has been a very sustainable culture in the urban planning. In Barcelona, for instance, from the startup plan in the middle of the 19th century till the urban planning during the 80s, there has been idea under how to build a city with mixed use composition and also with a compact condition. So I would say that the European city start from a good base of this idea of compact and mixed use city, but we already know that it's not enough. And we still have very important environmental problems in our cities with higher level air pollutions, with important lack of public spaces to make it easier, the social life in our cities. So I would say that this historical urban planning is shifting to new goals or to new strategies. And I would like to highlight two of them. The first one is how are we able to reorganize the mobility in our cities? And we also highlight that we need to make a metropolitan approach. And I'm talking about Barcelona, but I would say that Paris is more or less the same. We have important problem with the mobility between residents and work in our metropolitan areas. So I think it's a very important challenge. How are we able to reduce the distances between residents and work? And also how are we able to improve the public transport network metropolitan, okay? And the second goal, I would say, that is how are we able to transform our public space, just shifting for a public space absolutely occupied by cars, by asphalt, I would say, and how are we able to transform this asphalt public space to a new public space, increasing green areas, increasing social areas for meetings. So I think we are just in a very interesting point that the urban planning is shifting. Yes, be aware where are the new challenges in our cities.
Okay, Meka, do you want to add something on this idea of a European approach to the sustainable city?
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, by the way. Thank you for having me. Just in few words, Gecina is a real estate listed company which owns 20 billion of assets, 80% offices, 20% multi-residential, mainly based in Paris and Paris region. We have a couple of student housing somewhere else in France, but very located in this area. I just want to say something, if I may. I had the chance to attend a lecture given by one of the former Prime Minister, France Prime Minister, talking about François Mitterrand and saying that François Mitterrand, when it was the time to express what Europe was about, he would mention that Europe was the Europe of cities. It's about cities compared to North America, compared to Asia, compared to other places. Cities being the place where people gathered, where people have their activities, where they are studying, where they are living with their families, where they are having fun, going to theaters, going to concerts, etc. So this is all about this ecosystem which works together and makes people work together. And that's why we have to work on sustainability on a much more global and holistic way and inclusive way, rather than considering that it's silos by silos. We do not see, well, we have seen that, of course, in France, like, and by the way, everywhere in Europe, like everywhere else in the world. But today we are not seeing, cities are mature, and we are not seeing from scratch, part of the city is coming out of the ground. It's much more about regeneration, it's about rethinking, it's about working together, and you're right, Maire is very important. Metropolitan and regions make sense because there is no border from one city to the other one. And these, but I think that these issues become much more common sense and shared by the whole community, and everybody is working on the same side, even though we are not always successful, but we try hard.
I'd like maybe to focus on climate, and you mentioned the need to have a holistic approach. Maybe that's very European too. And Javier mentioned mobility, obviously, but I think there is more to CO2 than reducing carbon emissions in city, even though it's very important, of course. We know that the capital of existing building has a huge carbon footprint. So that's maybe another direction to go. Can we use that existing capital of buildings to rebuild the city on the city? Maybe we need to have more evolutive buildings. So that's maybe one trend on climate that I would like you to comment on. The second one being, we know that it will not be enough to reduce CO2 emissions, but we will need cities that have worked also on adaptation to climate change. So that's a second trend I would like maybe you to comment. You can choose whichever trend you want to comment. And the third one being, it's not enough to reduce the carbon emissions in the city, because we know that there are also what I call carbon emissions coming from everything that's imported in the city. So in the planning of sustainable cities, can we integrate the idea of producing a little more locally what people and building and companies consume locally, whether that's energy, maybe Meka, you can comment on that, or maybe whether that's all type of stuff that people need locally. I know that in Pobleno, in Barcelona, there is an experimentation with Fab City that we mentioned earlier in another session. So I'd like maybe the three of you to comment on this holistic approach to climate in the cities. Meka, yes, of course.
I think that this is the main issue we have today. And the main issue is that we have started, at Gecina, we have started to measure our carbon emission in 2008. But at that time, we didn't have all the good tools. So we are improving each year. But you have to start by measuring what you're doing and what the scope of what you're talking about and what are the real impacts. And you're talking about, yes, all these movements going back and forth. importing, materials from Asia, from South America, from everywhere else, rather than using local people, or having, using, people coming from all over the world, bringing you the type of needs you can have, and you can find people around you. And I think that this is something we are working on very hard. It's complicated. It's not that easy. We do not have the right measures and the right tools for doing so, but we shouldn't stop, and we need to do it. What we have done, for instance, in Gecina, we have decided to focus on the emission on our existing buildings, which means the emission of our buildings, which are already, occupied by our tenants, but also our tenants' emission. What is going to be the impact on them? How we're going to educate them? People are ready to understand, but you need to explain, how does that work? How does that work individually, but how does that work also globally? Everybody together. It takes a lot of time, and you're right about all the climate change and the impact of climate change. We need also to educate the insurance companies. If you want to do reuse of materials, these are not, these are not under the scope of insurers. You need to educate them and say, okay, if I'm reusing the materials, how you can accept to insure to have the right insurance, program, where compared to new materials. How you can think it differently. You can stop, tearing down buildings. By the way, we started to tear down buildings, and you were talking about mayors. In 2017, when I took over my CEO position, we were landlord of the former headquarters of Peugeot in Paris. And Gecina used to have a very beautiful program, but quite brand new. We were planning to tear down the existing buildings and to build a brand new one. I have been appointed on a Friday eve. On Saturday morning, the deputy mayor of Paris at that time, Jean-Louis Mika, called me, Meka, congratulations, you're not going to have your permit. And I said, it's Saturday, Jean-Louis, thank you. Can we wait until Monday morning? He said, I'm very serious. You need to rethink it on a repurposing, on a regeneration, on a reuse and a circular economy, not on a tearing down and building a brand new one. This was a very strong decision. And believe me, in terms of economics, all my colleagues came and said, it doesn't work. IRR doesn't work. It's not going to work. The Paris city, they are not nice people, blah, blah, blah. But by the way, we succeeded. We did a very beautiful thing. We worked hard. We learned. We completely refocused. We repositioned the way we were considering, and we brought in a lot of innovation. We need to bring technology, but smart technology in. So this was a great opportunity to think it through differently. And I think that this is something we need to expand, and probably people like us, with the experience we have, we should share more. We should put it together, and we should collaborate more.
Sébastien, maybe both what you saw when you were in Paris and now in France Ville Durable on those subjects?
We can't describe what a sustainable city is in the same way now than we did, for instance, during the COP21 in 2015. I remember I participated myself in some debates during the COP21, and when I raised the themes of adaptation or resilience during the meetings, I was asked to go out, saying, no, that's not the goal. We are here only to reduce carbon emission, and we will succeed. You are a kind of traitor to the cause if you're talking about adaptation, because if we need to adapt, it means that we failed, but we're not going to fail, so let's don't talk at all about adaptation. But adaptation is the emergency now. 6 years later, we can all acknowledge the fact that it didn't work. And carbon emission in 2019 were the highest at the highest rate in history. And so, of course, we need to focus on reducing carbon emission, or humankind will disappear. So, of course, we have to. It's mandatory, but it's not enough. It's not enough. And in the same time, we're going to plan the city, the change, the transformation of the city in order to reduce the carbon emissions in a holistic way. I completely agree with that. That's the other big change, thinking holistically instead of siloed. This is very complicated for local authorities, for instance. They're not used at all to this way of thinking. But we need to adapt, firstly, to the consequences of climate change. And it changes many things on buildings, mobility, and so on. And we also need to embed the resilience approach to the whole functioning of the city. And what does bring this theme to the other ones? It just reminds that if energy and climate are central, and of course, if we don't fix it, we're not going to fix anything. But it's not enough. And to create a sustainable city, we have to work on many other topics than climate and energy. To have this holistic approach, biodiversity, social inequities, and so on and so on. And I just want to end maybe this part with one other theme, which is completely new, and which is the first pillar of France Ville Durable now, sobriety. How can we build territorial strategies, economic policies that take into account the need of sobriety? Consume less, produce less, less transportation, less. We're not used at all. And so this brings to what you mentioned earlier about the renewing of the city. We have to find new economical models to intensify the value of what we already have instead of creating new things. And we're not used to, and that's a work in progress at the moment. And we have really intense discussions in our association with our private companies, with the national government, but everyone agrees with the fact that we don't have the choice now to shift the vision we had even 6 years ago.
Thank you very much. Javier, maybe your comments on what Meka and Sébastien have said, and on my maybe 3 initial trends on climate change.
Yeah. Just following one of the main ideas that Sébastien shared, I would say that climate change is because of cities, and cities. I am absolutely sure that will be also the solution for climate change. So the first idea is that we cannot separate how we fight the climate change and how we make our cities more resilient or more adapted to this climate change. I think that must be 2 things that must be tackled together, climate change and resilience in our cities. So I think that the goal is how are we able to change our urban model in a comprehensive point of view. We have to identify and set up actions that be able to improve the environmental conditions of the cities, of course, but also must be able to change the behaviors of people, of ourselves, how we move, how we shop, how we eat even. And I think there is a very important goals about food, energy, about food. For instance, at the very moment, Barcelona is currently the world's sustainable food capital. And we are trying to help to advance to agricultural transitions in the city with some public policies right now, in order to generate short circuits productions and distributions of food, trying to link the local food production, for instance, with the school canteens, trying to increase the areas that in the city are just generating urban agriculture, for example. And the other big idea that I would like to introduce is we have, I would say, opportunity, but also responsibility. We have a huge surface of roofs in our cities. So we have enormous surfaces of roofs that right now are doing nothing about environmental conditions in our cities. And there is a very big opportunity to recover this huge surface in order to help the city to improve the environmental conditions, introducing more green areas in the roofs, but also contributing to the energy model and also with the food maybe. So we are trying also to launch some initiatives to help neighborhood communities to introduce new self-sufficient energy panels in their roofs, also converting the roof in green areas, in order to start a huge transformation of this, we'll say, high-level surface of our cities. And finally, Meka said before about the idea of region, city region. I think it makes a lot of sense to recover the idea of city region model in order to identify which are the territories with some urban centers or cities within this territory that can be able to produce, to supply the goods, and also to generate the energy that this system needs. So I think we need to scale up the idea of sustainability and self-sufficiency in our cities in a territory scale, in order to identify which is this new scale that can be balanced, the relations between cities and between territory, in order also to be more self-sufficient.
I'd like to ask you, the three of you, there's an exhibition right now at Le Pavillon de l'Arsenal in Paris about the, I would say, aesthetic contribution of the sustainable city. So do you think it's a dilemma? Can a sustainable city be beautiful? I don't know what the criteria of beautiful is. Obviously, in a sustainable city, there are more maybe green areas like this, like this room. So whether that's aesthetic or not, but so what do you think? Do you think it's a dilemma, or do you think really the move towards more sustainable city can also bring a positive contribution to maybe the renewal of aesthetics in urban planning? Maybe Meka?
Well, I think that these two items are not contradictory. I think that the architects, and as soon as you are working with the community, by the way, at the time we were just building for building or, you know, consuming for consuming, we have created a lot of crabs, which are absolutely, they are ugly. They are consuming a lot of energies, they are not in the right place, and they are not serving properly their the occupants. I think that today we are much more thinking on the longer term. Sustainability means long term, and we need to come out of this short-term period. And if you think of planning, of thinking first, then going into, you know, this frenetic action life we have been through before, then you will think it through on a much more harmony between different type of existence, between different type of coexistence of the ecosystem. And when you are giving revival to an old building, giving it a new life, a new birth, this is absolutely a rejoiceful attitude. And I think that this is something we need to work on, and it's going to be beautiful. But as soon as we are working together, we are not in silos, we are not religious one against the other, we are not just defending absolute, you know, views about what is good and what is not, what is wrong. We should put our heads together and think it through, and I think that the beauty is going to be there, because harmony is what creates the beauty and the fact that we feel, you know, comfortable about. And this is something which is important. I'm used to talk to architects, even the biggest architects in the world, and when talking to them about their design, I always ask them, how do you clean this window? How do you clean here? How do you maintain? How can we replace, you know, some areas? And this is something we have to take into account. What we can consider as the beauty of all these old buildings which have been built, when you are talking about the Haussmannian buildings, is all about standards, thoughtful, and creation of something which is sustainable. Those stones are sustainable. Bricks are sustainable. Some of the ugly things we have put together are absolutely crap, and we should forget about them and not, you know, keep them as a maybe, I don't know, an example of the bad past, but not keep them forever. So I think that sustainability is about beauty. Even though when you have, by the way, gray hair, you can have a kind of, you know, attractive, you know, view on something which is old. Look at Notre Dame.
Xavier, Sébastien, quick answer, because I'd like to ask you a last question before we end. Yes.
Sorry. I completely agree. That's not contradictory, especially regarding adaptation. to adapt a city consists mainly in bringing back water and nature into the city, which is compatible, which matches with high aesthetic. But if sometimes, in some point, it's contradictory, my choice is done. We're talking about death. We're not talking, heat waves kill. I remember when I was working in Paris, one of the ideas in the city of Paris, one of the ideas brings by the services into the municipality was to paint the roof in white, you know, the roofs, which is efficient regarding heat. So what was the first reaction of some association? To apply to be UNESCO classified for the roofs in order to never change them, never, never. But do these people realize that climate change is something real, that kills and is going to kill more and more people? So between aesthetic and life, I choose life. I don't hesitate 1 second. I just want to raise this last number. It's mainly in the southern hemisphere, all right, but the last numbers we get about the consequences of heat waves is that by 2050, not 2100, 2050, which is tomorrow, 60% of the world population will live in areas where more than 20 days a year, outside temperature will be little. So if you don't have aircon, you die. You just die. 60% of the world population. So that's what we're talking about, so aesthetic.
Javier, quick comments so that I have time to ask my last questions about pinpoints. We cannot hear you.
You're on mute.
Yes. No, I was saying that, of course, I also agree. If we are transforming our cities, what is to say we are changing the people behaviors, we need to be seductive. I will say even we need to be able to set up sexy actions in the city in order to help people to shift from one behaviors to the new ones. And this is very also important to be aware that, in my opinion, beauty, urban beauty or beauty in our cities appears when shape or aesthetics are able to explain how we live and mainly how a society understands the urban development. So I think we already don't know how will be this new contemporary aesthetic in our cities. So at this very moment, we are just trying to identify which will be the new contemporary aesthetics in our cities, what will be the new urban landscape in our cities. I think that the challenge right now is trying to identify which will be the new beauty canons in our cities. We are not trying to recover the historical canons in our cities. We are not trying to recover only the historical beauty canons in our cities. We need to discover which will be this new idea of beauty in the city, which will be the new materials, the new solution, the new spaces, the new idea of spaces. And I think it's a very important challenge because we have been used to see and live in a public space in our cities, just dominated by cars, by a kind of public space that we are changing. So I think it's of course, beauty is important, but okay, we will need to discover which will be this new idea of beauty in the city.
Okay, thank you very much. We're coming to the end of our discussion, and I would like to come back to my initial point, which was about the Jaime learners pinpoint, maybe 2 or 3 for each of you, pinpoints in that post-COVID era to accelerate the change towards sustainable cities. I don't know who wants to start. Meka?
Well,
keep an eye on the time.
Yeah,
so
okay.
I will not be too stressed.
I'm going to be very short. It's probably transportation, the fact that people are moving from one part to the other, and linked to the fact that this is the transformation of the civilization of car civilization going to the civilization of what the movement stands for. Energy, and how, if you want to have sober buildings, we need not to have the construction linked to the type of energies. You know, one day you have the oil, which is very good, you know, type of energy. The next day you have electricity, then you have the hydrogen, then the hydrogen is not good. You need to have the buildings completely disconnected and be sober, disconnected from the type of energy, and we need to continue to research on that. And the third thing is the mixity of usage. You need to have the copy of villages in the cities.
The quarter of an hour city
absolutely.
that we couldn't discuss with Carlo. Thank you for bringing it back. Yes, Sébastien.
I have to mention something that works everywhere, that could be developed in any cities in the world, that was raised in Paris, and I personally led this project, so I have to mention it. This logical of points that you can use everywhere in the city to have a global effect. I want to mention schoolyards and the role that schoolyards everywhere in all the cities can play in cooling the city if you replace asphalt by a roof, by a ground like that, and
Which
so on.
Which is the plan in Paris?
We named it the Oasis Schoolyards program, but since many other cities in the world copied and were inspired by this project, and it's interesting because it's a holistic project that brings, in the same time, to create cool islands, to create places that are open to the public at weekends and during vacation, to strengthen local links and social links among the population, especially refugees as well for the elderly during the heat waves. In the same time, with the same money, there is a huge program of education to climate change for the children, the teachers, the parents who are concerned by this program, and so on and so on. It's a very good example of what we can do to transform a city using an existing asset, an existing infrastructure, and the existing budget that we use every year to replace the asphalt. Just take this money to put grass instead of asphalt, and it will be cheaper, by the way. And so we have all these solutions that can be even cheaper for the cities. But we have to think more naturally, more logically, and more than all, maybe think about our development with boundaries. And the new concept is this planet boundaries that could be added to the SDGs, to the Sustainable Development Goals, because there is something missing with the SDGs. And I think this was mentioned this morning in another roundtable here with Kate and the donut theory. Kate Roworth. And so that's something we're bringing now to the local authorities we're working with.
And I know the city of Amsterdam has all its economic recovery plan based on the donut economy. Javier, the 2 or 3 pinpoints to change cities.
Yeah, really fast. No, I was also thinking about the schools, like Sébastien said, and trying not to repeat, I will add two ideas about the advantage that the schools actually represent in the city. The first one is that we have in our cities a very well-distributed map of schools, so we can think, just to recover one idea of Heine Lerner, it's like a acupuncture strategy. If we are able to improve the public space surrounding our schools, we will be able to improve the whole city. Just to understand that the schools can be the epicenter of public space, of an urban transformation in their surroundings. And the second key idea is that the school have a very pedagogic advantage. So sometimes it's very difficult trying to explain people why you are transforming a street, you are reducing car lane, or while you're doing some things in the street, but everybody in the city understand why you are improving a school and why are you improving the public space around the school, why you're reducing the car space in the front door of the school, why you're introducing greenery in front of the school. So I think just linking with the idea of beauty, the idea of a new beauty canon in the city, I think with the schools we have a very good opportunity with a very good pedagogic advantage in order to increase the speed of the transformations of the city, and also to increase the idea, helping people to understand why are we doing this kind of transformations.
Okay, thank you very much for stressing the school pinpoint, because I remember moderating a discussion with Jaime Lerner and Bill McDonough a few years ago, and I remember their pinpoint at that time was to change education with the idea that if we educate children the same way we have for decades, then we will have the same citizens and at the end of the day, the same cities. So thank you very much for the three of you. Just to remember, Jaime Lerner changed Curitiba in the 70s with 3 pinpoints. One was the idea of making public transportation free. That was one pinpoint. Second was to increase the number of parks and greener areas in the city for inhabitants. And the third one was a great program called Waste for Food, where they asked people to collect waste and to bring it back to give to homeless people, especially food, etc., etc. So thank you very much for the three of you, Sébastien, Meka, Xavier, from remote, to have participated in this session. Very, very exciting as far as I'm concerned, and I've been talking about the subject for decades. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. A pleasure.